Evening and welcome to Inclusive Product Week. My name is Steven from Code for San Jose. I'll be responsible for hosting today's session. As I just mentioned, we'll take, at the end of the presentation, we'll do some Q&A, so feel free on the right side of the channel to ask any questions that come up throughout the presentation. Okay, I am very happy to welcome Sidra and Dena, who will present an interdisciplinary approach to product design for government. Sidra is a data-informed UX consultant and service design enthusiast. They are passionate about interdisciplinary approaches to building digital access with government for vulnerable populations and communities. Sidra previously led product design for the City of Toronto's Open Data Portal. Sidra has lived in 5 continents, but calls Toronto home. You can find Sidra on Twitter, and her handle is @Sidramatic. Imagine you might be able to share that in Slack as well. And our other presenter, Dena, is a product manager and a product consultant with more than 5 years of experience in tech ed. She is passionate about helping the government with the transition and adaptation of a more agile mindset and practices. Dena lives in GTA. Please, let's give a warm welcome to the stage, Sidra and Dena.
Thank you so much, Steven. It's super exciting to be here. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us tonight. We are excited to show you our work and share with you what we've learned about designing inclusive products for the public service sector. We would like to start by telling you about ourselves. Who is Team Babel? The 3 of us are Code for Canada Fellows. Code for Canada is a non-profit organization that matches mid-career tech professionals with government partners to work on innovative projects. Our team works within the Employment and Social Development Canada, known as ESDC. My name is Dena. I'm the product manager of our team. Sidra, who's co-presenting with me tonight, is our talented UX designer, and our developer is Regan. He's probably in the audience watching. We are working under the Benefit Delivery Modernization at ESDC. The name of our project is the Policy Difference Engine, and we will tell you more about it towards the end of our presentation. In the next 30 minutes or so, we are going to talk to you about our experience designing an inclusive product for the public service sector. We will start by going over social security programs in Canada and how they fit into the overall service design trajectory. After that, we will discuss some of the key considerations for when you are designing an inclusive product in the government. Some things might surprise you. Some of these considerations include working with multidisciplinary teams and embracing different worldviews. We will talk about some of the challenges we've run into over the course of our fellowship, and we'll share some of the tools and techniques we found that have helped us reinforce the importance of having diverse perspectives in the design process. Finally, we will share the Policy Difference Engine prototype. We've been working on it for the past few months. Our product seeks to help users better identify the potential impact of a possible policy change on people, budget, and programs. Before we jump into things, let's talk about who the population we serve is. We work in Employment and Social Development Canada, which is an arm of the Canadian federal government that is responsible for supervising social security. This includes programs like old age security, employment insurance, parental leave, and special benefits for people who have survived the loss of a child or people who may be living with a disability. These services can be pretty complex and can go from the client interaction with a service agent over the phone all the way to a social security tribunal, which makes decisions about appeals. Almost everyone in Canada has or will receive at least one of these benefits during their lifetime. So it's pretty important that these services are designed to be inclusive. The digital tools we create seek to improve these services.
All right, so we love comparisons. One way to better understand how the economic social security system works in Canada is to do it comparatively. So in Canada, we have the Canadian Pension Plan, which is also known as CPP. It is our version of Social Security for seniors. So both of these are government retirement income schemes that you receive when you hit a certain age. Both of them are paid for by taxes that you pay on the wages that you make. Differences. We don't have the same scale of population to start. Tax rates and income thresholds in Canada tend to be typically lower than those of Social Security, but the benefits also tend to be a little bit lower. And comparatively, the Canadian senior poverty rate is 5.4% compared to 9 to 11%, which indicates that there are regional variations. You might be asking, why are these people talking about retirement at this talk? And that's primarily because when we design programs specific to these populations, they involve many, many, many moving parts. So the digital tools that we create to support their administration is a really small part, but an integral part of the big picture. And that's what we'll focus on for our presentation. So you might have heard about service design. Service design is a really big theme in government right now. So it's basically a strategic approach to what it looks like to create a service according to not just the needs of the people who will be using that service, but the people who provide that service and the space in between, everything that happens along the way. Service design seeks to create new services and improve existing ones, and it shares a lot of ground with user-centered design. Product design is greatly informed by the design of the services that we're seeking to serve, essentially. So in the realm of IT, let's go back to government for a second. The ways in which government creates products and programs around these services, you have to remember that if someone's going to receive these services or benefits, somebody has to regulate, administer, price, review, analyze, assess, and implement these benefits. Somebody also needs to evaluate the success of the benefit programs and consider how to meaningfully measure improvement in performance. So in the realm of IT, unfortunately, government hasn't had the strongest start. Did you know that almost 90% of government IT projects fail? And this rate is standard whether we're talking about the Canadian or American context. So you might be asking, why do government products have such a high failure rate? And that's where inclusion comes in. We think that we're missing our chances here. A lot of the issues include things like, in many cases, projects are kind of poorly scoped, or they're over budget, or they're over schedule. Typically, services are bound to regulatory constraints that we'll talk about in a bit that can inhibit your capacity to deliver. It takes a lot of work and time to make a policy change, and sometimes important inclusivity conversations can kind of fall through the gaps. A lack of digital maturity and the legacy systems and the modernization efforts that so many governments are currently working through, they can also be a barrier sometimes because the option to stop or pause a service to improve it doesn't exactly exist, right? So what's really missing here is the concept of inclusivity by design. Much of it comes down to the tendency to overlook the intense importance of qualitative analysis and user research, which really are the things that we should be doing in order to make sure that we're providing the essential basics for the people who are most likely to fall through the cracks. So what does it mean to be inclusive when we're designing for this space?
Good service design around policy considers not just the organizational and operational impacts, but the structural impacts as well. By baking inclusion into the equation, we can design better products for the people who need them the most. How might we build something that highlights potential inequalities resulting from a change to a government service or policy? The good news is there is emerging culture within civic tech spaces that seeks to do just that. Let's go over a couple of examples.
So in Canada, we incorporate inclusion into service design in a number of ways. the digital products that we create within government are part of the service design lifecycle. So depending on the region, in Ontario, we're Ontario Human Rights Code, which is a pretty solid place to start. So in the growing commitment to digital accessibility, we also have regional accessibility acts. We have the AODA, which is known as the ADA in the United States. This act provides guidelines as well as regulatory insight into how digital services, or government services in general, including digital, are supposed to serve everybody regardless of ability. In Canada, as you might know, we also have the Official Languages Act. So that ensures inclusion for folks who speak French as a first language, as well as English. Canada also has a commitment to hiring veterans when it comes to hiring practices, as well as Indigenous and First Nations groups. So this is an example of the Inclusive Design Toolkit that's been created by the Government of Ontario that folks can leverage in order to better understand who the onus falls onto when we're thinking about who's responsible for accessibility, who is excluded from important conversations, et cetera, et cetera. One tool that we've relied on heavily in our work is the GBA+. So GBA+ stands for Gender-Based Analysis Plus. It's basically a framework for performing equity-based analysis, and it promotes rigorous research that is sensitive to identity factors. So contrary to the name, it's not just about gender, but it's about how to meaningfully consider inclusion when working with different equity-seeking groups or marginalized groups of people. It provides extremely comprehensive training and guiding frameworks on how to assess your product, proposal, project, or service for inclusivity. And some of these resources are available for free on the Canadian government's website, so I encourage you to take a look at them. So we're going to share 2 more examples of inclusion in public service product design with you.
In south of Stockholm, a multidisciplinary team created accessible design sprints for citizens to co-create a dossier for neighborhood improvement. They rapidly tested and iterated solutions, such as the creation of a central playing field for children. The result of the collaboration was the delivery of a better experience with better outcomes and a lower cost. This is a significant trust-building exercise for people who may have their hesitations about having their voices heard within the complex layers of bureaucracy. Another great example of putting inclusive design into practice is that of the UNDP Honduras and their partnership with the Chamber of Commerce and Industry to co-design 3D printed prosthetics. They work directly with returning migrants and victims of violence with disabilities to design and iterate on prototypes of customized 3D printed prostheses. The program's satisfaction rate was extremely high. These are some of the unique ways in which, as public service designers, we can perform inclusion in meaningful ways. Digital is no different. So what does it take to socialize the idea of inclusion into digital public service designs? Inclusion is not a contest and it's not a perfect science. In order to provide an optimal service, we need to make sure we have ways to measure and understand those experiences. Ultimately, we are guided by the idea that digitized government is not the same as a digital government. Slapping an IT solution on an existing government service, such as digitizing a form that was previously filled out by hand, might not be enough to create an inclusive experience. There are big decisions to be made and much to be learned. So we are going to tell you a few things we've learned that have helped us better understand how to push for inclusivity in public service product teams.
So the first step of creating an inclusive product is in the planning. So for public services, to ensure that you've identified all of the stakeholders, especially those who will be impacted by the end product, and offer them a seat at the decision-making table. In government, we typically have decision makers represented by so many layers of stakeholders, and often government organizations will have both vertical and horizontal structures that we have to consider. One limitation is that sometimes these layers don't actually talk to each other, or things get lost in translation from one level of leadership to another. So we have to advocate for and make space for the participation of people like subject matter experts and user experience designers and data scientists and end users when we're planning products, or we're going to fail at inclusivity from the get-go. We also have to allow for flexibility and growth in government. More often than not, project management systems in government are based on legacy systems, so modernization is a priority. While there is growing acceptance of working in the open and in agile ways within government, you'll still see digital products where the entire thing is planned in one fell swoop and delivered. The result is different teams like design and development end up working in silos with varying levels of alignment and varying levels of success. The result is typically a project that ends up being so big it inevitably falls short of its expectations. So by adding flexibility to the structure of product planning, we're able to account for when things change, which happens a lot. We're also able to continuously iterate towards improvement in a sustainable way. So this means we're not inclusive not just in delivery, but in how we work to make that delivery happen. Another side effect of legacy-based project planning is that there is such an inconsistency in the stakeholder development of a government service product. The sheer scale of federal or national governance alone is the challenge. The inherent structure of public sector roles also means that a person can have so many multiple domains within which they're performing work, and that people are moved around a lot. So imagine designing for these conditions, prep for them, plan for the chaos, assert the challenges of scale when you're thinking about what it is that you're going to do and what scale you'll deliver it at. So consider that in the conversation around inclusion. So next, I'm going to ask you to put on your creative problem-solving hats. Imagine you're a home architect. You are expecting to meet your client to hear all about their needs, like their family size or special requests, like maybe they want a pool. And so we call this the problem statement in the design space. But just imagine for a sec that your client comes to the table with a plan in mind. They already know what type of wood they want you to use, what square footage of glass you'll need to build the staircase. Your client is the client, but they do not have the experience nor the background to necessarily understand why something might not be technically feasible or why physics might not be in the favor of that spiral glass staircase. This is why solutioning is often the worst enemy of an inclusive product design. We run into these interactions regularly, so it's good to be prepared. So in an inclusive product world, each person brings their own expertise to the table and their knowledge is valued accordingly, regardless of years of service or accolades. The best solutions account for diverse perspectives. Data is another big piece. Governments run on data. So whether it's complex government schedules for employment schedules for determining your eligibility for employment insurance, or seeing how much old age income support you might qualify for if you move to another country, we as a government collect a lot of it. So the 2021 Canadian census was just conducted last week, and it's arguably the largest data collection exercise in Canada. This is the first year that the Canadian census included questions on gender identity to better serve trans populations. So like we said, inclusion isn't a perfect science in governance, but public sector services should continually seek to evolve in the wake of growing social inequity. Don't just collect data, however. Make sure it's meaningful data and that there's a clear purpose and justification that's obvious to your users. Building government trust to ensuring data privacy and anonymization practices is pretty key to this. Next, this should not surprise you, but you're going to have to traverse quite a few layers. You need to be aware and alert of additional bureaucratic and regulatory layers that might inhibit your inclusion. So in this case, we're thinking about when you want to use an external collaboration service like Google Slides or Miro, you might not be able to do that given the mood of the VPN that you might have to work within. Many governments have extensive paperwork and wet signature requirements, which means that they require physical signatures as opposed to e-authorization, which can be tricky. There's also extensive engaging in conversations with outside stakeholders that can be a challenge, depending on like what the vendor relationships are or whether there's a consulting contract in place. This can limit the people we really want to talk to in a formal capacity. And then sometimes, honestly, you're bound by the IT infrastructure requirements and the competencies you expect just aren't there. And that's okay. This is where we ask you to embrace different worldviews. Some of the best research is interdisciplinary, and that means expanding the types of knowing and the types of research and learning that we take to mean as valid. There's so many lenses that can be applied to a particular civic issue. So for example, very minor changes to a social security program could have a significant impact on folks in a specific region, for example, people living in rural areas, or a very specific class of worker. Inclusivity in policy, program, and product design means that we find ways to assess these experiences and include them in our design of products. It means that we look beyond the impact of cost to government or GDP, just so that we can better understand how the tools we create might impact people's lives on a socio-demographic level. So a really important question that we're constantly asking ourselves during planning is challenging our assumptions. Who is missing in the room and why? We challenge these assumptions not just about our team or organization, but also about our users. An example I'll give you is oftentimes Dena and I are in meeting spaces and the assumption will come out that, well, we were all born in Canada. That's not inclusive because Dena and I were not born in Canada. Excuse me. There's also sometimes talking about inclusion around certain communities like LGBTQ people as though we aren't in the room, and that's not true. There's often assumptions made about ability based on what people can see. And it even comes down to the stock photography we use. So I implore you to always ask, who is missing from the conversation? Sometimes better identifying these inequities will help us understand where we might need to prioritize inclusion.
So how have these values informed our work during the fellowship? Introducing the Policy Difference Engine. PDE is a set of tools and processes that can forecast the impact of a proposed policy change on people. PDE can help a wide range of stakeholders look at the policy design and the policy change process with a more holistic lens through modeling and forecasting. Data is, of course, of essence to this process. PDE is currently at the prototype stage. We've done a small internal release with some basic rules codified into a simulation engine. We are currently working with data authorities within government to procure anonymized employment insurance client data that will help us better understand the demographic profile of the people we service.
So now we're going to show you the thing, but before we show you the thing, we want you to remember some things. Number one, this is very, very, very early MVP, V1 of the Policy Difference Engine. It uses a very, very small subset of Employment Insurance Act as a basis. So that's the pieces around maternity policy. And it uses something called microsimulation that helps us do a little bit of predictive analysis potentially. And the example we'll show you now uses completely fake data. So I ask that you keep that in mind. So with that being said, let's take a look. Oops. So, sorry. So we're going to take a look at the maternity benefit simulator that I'm waiting for it to load. Okay, so here's what's going on here. So basically what we've done is we have codified the maternity policies into code, and so that we can change their variables and see what the potential impact would be on different sociodemographic groups. So to start, we've got the base case, and the base case is what the policy is right now. So right now, if I'm a new parent and I want to apply for maternity benefits, what I have right now is an entitlement. So right now, the maximum weekly amount that I can get is $595. The percentage of my average income that this represents that's insurable is 55%, and the number of weeks that I'll be receiving maternity benefits for is 15. So this is the policy as it is right now, but let's say that there's a policy proposal, let's help Canadians out a little bit because it's kind of a rough time financially. So why don't we increase the maximum weekly amount to $615? And why don't we increase the percentage of average income that they can claim? So let's make it 57%. And then the number of weeks, let's give them some additional weeks to stay with their kid at home. So let's say 17 weeks. So now that we've put in the variant case, which is what we might want to potentially change the policy to, and this is something that a policy analyst would be looking at, we run our simulation. So what our simulation gives us, again in tables, but down the road, we're hoping to visualize this in beautiful ways. But right now what we get is our aggregated results and our demographic aggregation with the simulation that we ran. So the one thing I want to mention is an example here of inclusive design. So this is our first iteration, and we already know that this language is inherently problematic. The language of gainers, who are the number of people who have gained from this policy change, gained money in this case, and the number of people who have lost money in this case, which in this case is 0 in our simulation. This language comes from the language of SPSDM, which is a very old model that's used for a statistical tool that's used within the upper echelons of government to better understand sociodemographics and things like that. So using data like this. So what we're doing is we've acknowledged that this is a thing, and we're adapting this language and improving it for the next iteration. But we figured there's no shame in showing you an early version and admitting where we know that we're not being necessarily very inclusive. So with that being said, we also get some really cool demographic aggregation. So what this tells us is that that potential policy might not actually have any significant regional impacts by province, which is pretty cool. And then we can actually look at our individual results. So the cool thing is that we can look at, potentially visualize the age and see if there's maybe an age impact. So maybe there's a disproportionate impact where people of a certain age and older are getting a lot more money than people who are within a younger age cohort, or maybe people who don't speak English as a first language or French as a first language. We wanted to maybe potentially see what the impacts on them are. So there's a lot of capability here, and we're really excited to continue to dive deep into what we can do. So that's our policy difference engine. And so we're gonna just start to wrap up. So we're gonna talk about just some of the concepts here. So we were inclusive in our product research stage, which was 3 months, because we went beyond the bounds of the government institutions we work with. Our user interviews included policy analysts, academics, research papers from to find anecdotal lived experience. The next piece is that we work in the open when possible. So we can't release everything we're working on, but we share our journey and learning whenever possible, including at presentations like this. We also work using collaborative tools like Envision and Miro, so non-designers and non-developers can share their thoughts on an even playing field with a minimum technical learning curve. And finally, with project structure, we always co-create our sprints and mutually agree on the goals and deliverables, as well as perform sprint retrospectives so that we can better understand how we can better improve. And this is an ongoing agile process. So what do we imagine as the future of the PDE, given that it's in a really early stage? Well, we imagine this magical future where data is driven by robust research methods, it's interpreted using interdisciplinary approaches, it's implemented using data-informed agile delivery, and it's in continuous improvement mode because inclusivity needs to evolve over time, and we should as well. So this is about making government work for people, and especially making digital government work for the people who need it the most.
So what we hope you will take away from our presentation today are the following. Champion diversity of talent and build teams with diverse backgrounds. In doing so, you will be increasing your product success. We all have our biases. Being aware of them and checking them at every stage of design and development helps with mitigation of risks. Allocate time and create safe space for all voices to be heard in the room. Take the time to build digital capacity along the way. Share knowledge, identify avenues of collaboration with others. This way, knowledge is distributed and change gains momentum. And a final thought, inclusivity is not a check mark on a list. It's a holistic and fundamental requirement that needs to be embraced at micro and macro level of any organization. Thank you for listening to our presentation. We want to give a shout out to all our government partners at ESDC, in a specific Pia Andrews, Jason Gould, and Honey Dakani for championing our project and our team. A special thank you to George Adler for reviewing our slides and providing feedback. We are also grateful for the support we've been receiving from the Code for Canada staff. And last but definitely not least, a thank you to Andra.co for the lovely illustration that they share with the public. Before we open up the floor for questions, I would like to invite you to visit our website, teambabel.ca. You can stay connected with us, learn more about our project, and if you have any question, we are always an email or a Slack message away. Thank you.
Thank you, Dena and Sidra. I was going to invite everyone from the presentation to, if you had any questions, please go over to the Q&A and give it a few minutes if you're thinking about it. One thing that came to mind for me, Dena and Sidra, is here, at least here in Colorado where I'm at, a lot of the governments are going through digital transformation, ongoing, constantly here. But one thing I was really thinking about is the inclusivity transformation that governments are going through, and I just found your product it could very easily be a part of that whole process, whether it's going through this digital transformation, they're also thinking about inclusivity transformation, hopefully. Something I thought. Yeah.
That's definitely a good observation and much needed in the way we work.
Right. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any question in the chat at this point.
Well, one thing to just remind all the attendees is that there is a Slack channel for this presentation. So if you had any additional questions that came up after later today or another day after this, please visit the Slack channel and can continue the conversation there as well.
Absolutely. I want to pick up Angie's question. In your experience, what stakeholders have you had the most challenges working with and why? I'm going to give this a try and then pass it on to Sidra to add to it. I think the stakeholders with the biggest challenge are the ones that would have a hard time understanding the product, especially if it's a bit more of a technical product. And that's really, really okay. It's up to us to make sure that we build that knowledge, we share that knowledge, we inform them of how the product works in simple language. What is the impact? What is the value? What are the benefits of it in the short and in the long term? And it does take time. They would not come around, over one conversation or two. So it's a consistent effort of knowledge sharing. And eventually people do see the impact. Eventually people do see the value in the work you are doing. At the beginning of our fellowship, we had a much harder time securing conversation. But like this week, we actually got like a random email. Someone in the government had heard about the work we were doing and they wanted to have a conversation. So.
Yeah, Dena, that's such a good answer. And Angie, thank you for asking and for coming. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think on my end as the UX design person who also de facto falls into the policy analysis UX research side of things, I think there's something that academia has nailed down that government still struggles with. And we've talked about it a bit in our presentation, but basically each stakeholder represents a different side of government. And typically these stakeholders are representatives of even higher leadership levels, right? And our access to those leadership levels is, it's not a direct channel. There's many, 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 many layers. And different stakeholders value different things, and not all stakeholders necessarily understand the value of qualitative or anecdotal knowledge compared to something that's more traditionally looked at when we measure policy impact, which would be something like cost, or like, how much is this going to cost the government, as opposed to looking at like, how does this further drive racial inequity in our society, for example, right? So essentially, a lot of the challenges we have had has been everybody is interested in saying, absolutely, we want to work towards equity, but a lot of times those conversations are really difficult, and they kind of involve looking at ourselves and thinking about, well, how are we set up in a way where we might not be, super inclusive? So an example of that is like when we're having, user testing sessions, if we conduct them just in one language, where, Canada is an incredibly diverse country, we speak a bajillion languages over here, you are excluding people that do use your services, right? And, we can't serve everybody all the time, but in the interest of growing to meet society's evolving changes, I think a lot of that knowledge translation work has to be done with stakeholders. So one really great example is Regan, our developer on our team, has been running lunch and learns on rules as code, which is something that we use a lot in our work. And those are non-technical for the most part, and they're supposed to have everybody understand the value of the work that we're doing and why it's important to write legislation in machine readable forms. So yeah, there's ways to mitigate that, but there's definitely challenges stakeholders depending on level of seniority and what it is they're interested in.
Third question in the Q&A from Anonymous. What are the best ways for folks interested in civic tech to get involved with government to change things for the better from within?
That's a good question. Dena, you want to go first?
Sure, by all means. I got involved through Code for Canada, and I think, to the best of my knowledge, a lot of countries are picking up. There's Code for America, Code for Australia. So look in your community and see what are some of the organizations that are trying to pave the pathway of connecting people from the tech background to the government. That was my pathway. There are also a lot of non-for-profit organizations that are trying to work with the government in their own capacity. So looking them up and trying to see if you can volunteer for them, or what are some capacities in which they would be able to help you connect on various levels of government. That would be something that I suggest.
Yeah, and I mean, to add to that, if you look at my wall over here, all of these like lanyards are for hackathons. So as a designer, I go to a lot of civic tech hackathons. They're happening almost all over the world, and now that we're doing that remotely, it's a chance for anybody to kind of jump in and help create or design services, co-create, imagine what cities could look like, what a country could look like. And contrary to the title, they're not just for people who can code. They're often actually missing other very important roles as well. The other piece is that the civic tech community is huge on meetup.com. So hop on Meetup, type in civic tech, and you'll find a meetup group nearby. And the third piece is that start to pay attention to your local government if you are interested. There are communities all over the place, but like your local public library is a good place to start. But check with your government. Chances are your state-based government does have some kind of body that's dedicated to digital, and typically they'll have events or they might have collaborative opportunities. And in Canada, we have an example. It's called BC Dev Exchange, where if you are a developer or designer, you can bid on tiny little government projects, government IT projects, to help kind of move change forward without having to go through this whole big formal procurement process. So those are the 3 things I would do: meetups, hackathons, and check with your local governance.
Thank you so much, Angie, and thank you for all the great questions. We really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, I think you're on mute.
Nice. I wanted to thank you both again, Sidra and Dena, for answering those questions and for the really great presentation. It was a pleasure to have you with us. If there's no more questions, this will conclude the session. Thank you all for attending. We hope you have learned and enjoyed the presentation. You can continue the conversation in the Slack channel, as I'd mentioned, at the top of the chat on the right side of the panel. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you again, Dena and Sidra.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Bye, everyone.
Bye.